Good afternoon and welcome to the Walter and Betsy Stern Center here at Hudson Institute for today's event on competition in U.S. wireless markets. I'm Ken Weinstein, President and CEO of Hudson Institute. I'm delighted you could be here today. I'd also like to welcome our panel of rather prominent experts, Professor Gerald Faulhaber of the University of Pennsylvania and Professor Robert Hahn of Oxford University, as well as our moderator and host, Senior Fellow Harold Furchtgott-Roth, Director of the Center for Economics of the Internet here at Hudson Institute. This year, Hudson celebrates a half-century of forward-looking analytic policy research. Herman Kahn, Max Singer, and Oscar Rubhausen founded Hudson in 1961 because they saw a need for a more publicly engaged policy research organization. They envisioned a think tank that would think creatively about how to achieve a better future, particularly through ever broader use of innovative technology, and that would draw on the creativity of leading policy experts to help shape public debate on the critical issues of the day. This is the first public event with the Center for the Economics of the Internet, and we are confident that it will prove a worthy successor to Herman Kahn's legacy. The Center for the Economics of the Internet is, as you all know, our newest Hudson program, focused on Internet policy and associated communications issues from a free market perspective. It launched just last month. We're fortunate to have former FCC Commissioner Harold Furchtgott-Roth as the center's director. Harold, of course, needs no introduction here at Hudson, but allow me anyhow. Harold was Commissioner of the Federal Communications Commission from 1997 to 2001. In that capacity, he served on the Joint Board on Universal Service. He is one of the few economists to have served as a federal regulatory commissioner, holding a PhD in economics from Stanford University, and the only one to have served on the Federal Communications Commission. Before Harold's appointment to the FCC, he was chief economist for the House Committee on Commerce and a principal staff member on the Telecommunications Act of 1996. Even here in Washington, Harold is known as an exceptional scholar in his familiarity with the ever-changing communications policy landscape and his devotion to market principles. And we look forward to further incisive analysis and debate from the Center for the Economics of the Internet here at Hudson Institute. It is now my distinct pleasure to turn it over to Harold.
Well, thank you, Ken. It's a great honor to be here today, particularly on a panel with such distinguished scholars as Gary Faulhaber and Bob Hahn. Before we get started, I just want to, as a housekeeping matter, mention two upcoming events. One on September 16th, when Judge Stephen Williams of the D.C. Circuit will be here again at noon. And on October 6th, Commissioner Robert McDowell of the Federal Communications Commission. We will have other outstanding speakers coming to the center to speak in the months ahead, and we will keep everyone notified about those. But today, we have two of the leading economists in the world of regulation and telecommunications with us, and I think it's great to have them here for the inaugural event. I've known both these individuals for many years, and so I'm actually probably more than any of us would like to admit. Jerry has been one of the leading telecommunications economists for, I'm sure, much longer than he would care to admit, many decades.
Emeritus.
And he served as chief economist for the FCC in the late 90s. Bob Hahn is one of the leading experts on the costs of regulation. He is a prolific author and currently a professor at Oxford and various other places. I'm going to turn the program over to these two gentlemen, and I think the idea is they will make a presentation, and at the end of it we'll have some questions and answers, and I very much look forward to this. Here.
Thank you, Harold. This is going to be a bit of a jumping jack flash presentation. I'm going to be doing the first half of it. Second will be Bob Hahn. Third will be my wife. Raise your hand. She will break into cheers at the appropriate moments. And the fourth is our co-author, Hal Singer, who will answer all the hard questions. Unfortunately, Hal isn't here today, so just hold them all. Okay. Now, first of all, I'd like to thank you for coming out to attend a conference on competition in the wireless industry. I always find this kind of surprising, assessing competition in the wireless industry, because the evidence of your eyeballs basically suggests this is one of the most competitive and most innovative industries going. This is a little bit like saying, are pizza shops competitive? Are dry cleaners or supermarkets, are they competitive? It kind of like, why do we even ask this question? It seems pretty obvious to all of us, but of course, we're here in Washington, okay? And in fact, we might ask, what value could regulators possibly add to this debate? Well, they think they do add a lot. Congress has charged both the FCC and DOJ FTC with assessing market competition in their respective spheres. So this is really a policy issue, okay, of course. What are the rules, okay? Now, the FCC directed Congress in 1993 as part of an omnibus reconciliation bill or something to issue annual reports on the state of competition in wireless. This is very early on in the wireless industry. We were just about to start doing auctions. So this is the Mesozoic area of wireless, okay? Now, the FCC has been cranking along issuing these reports, and they just issued the 15th report. Part of what they're supposed to do in their charge from Congress is to make a finding as to whether there's effective competition or not. Now, up through the 13th, the FCC found effective competition. The 14th and 15th, they made several changes, one of which was to substantially expand the scope of what they were studying. But the other thing is they made no finding about effective competition or no effective competition. It was just no finding at all. Okay, that's significant departure. Now, of course, we know what DOJ FTC does, and they are usually using competitive analysis to look at proposed mergers. Also, conduct. Whoops. We off? Okay, we back on? Good. This comes from the Hart-Scott-Rodino Act to look at such mergers, okay? Now, these guys are, in essence, the experts at this within the government. My view is they do a pretty good job, actually a very good job. They issue horizontal merger guidelines, which they've done regularly. The latest ones were less than a year old. So they've looked at this pretty carefully, and they say, this is how you do competitive analysis. Okay, now why does this matter? Well, obviously, it matters for DOJ FTC, particularly if you're trying to do a merger. And in fact, the way it's applied is very specific and very targeted in merger cases. They really look at least two questions, one of which is, does a merger substantially lessen competition? And here the issue is, you have to know what competition is to know if a merger lessens it. Second is they compare potential efficiencies that might be claimed by the merging parties to likely harm to competition. Again, you have to know what competition is in order to make these assessments. These are very targeted, very specific use of competition. The FCC is much, much broader in scope, okay? And in a sense, the question which is always lurking in the background on these reports is regulation in this market called for? Okay. The reports can in fact set a general direction of, do we need more competition, do we need more regulation or less, okay? And a change in assessment, which I'm concerned that we're now seeing, may foretell changes in regulatory action with regard to this market. So yes, this matters, and here's why. Okay, this is, in some sense, the bottom line we're looking at. we kind of looked at the 210 horizontal merger guidelines as a benchmark for how to assess competition. I think most academic economists as well as government economists agree this is the way to go. And there are two kinds of evidence, and let me talk about them because they're kind of important. One is what I might call direct evidence, okay? And this really grew out particularly of the Staples OfficeMax merger that was done by the Federal Trade Commission back in 1997. It was really a landmark case. So what you're looking at is what's going on, what do people do in this market? What's happening to prices? What's happening to entry? Do we see explicit rivalrous behavior, either people raising prices one after the other or cutting prices one after the other? And what does innovation look like in these markets? Do we see competitive innovation? Okay, so you actually look at what people are doing in the market. The indirect, which is a much more traditional way of doing things, is the market share, or HHI, which is Hirschman-Herfindahl Index, which is a way of measuring market share. And it's based on an economist who's even older than I am, which is Joe Bain, who back in the 50s came up with what he called the structure, conduct, performance paradigm. And here the notion is there's a structure in the industry, read market share. This causes people to behave in a certain way, their conduct, okay? And this in turn leads to the overall performance of the market. So if we find the structure of the market is highly concentrated, ergo, we're going to get bad performance downstream. Now, as a general matter, this is what people used in antitrust pretty much up until the 80s, I would say. Basically because getting direct evidence was not anything anybody thought about and was kind of too hard to get anyway. But the empirical evidence for the link between market structure and performance was actually fairly weak. There were some correlations, but it was difficult to say, you know, we had causality here. It's always been a little weak, but it's kind of what we had. And if you look at the big antitrust cases in the 40s, you know, Alcoa, Kodak in the 50s, they were all tended to be, well, pretty much a market structure. DOJ, FTC began to move away from this, and the Staples OfficeMax merger is a good case in point. Staples wanted to do a merger with OfficeMax. These were 2 out of 3 large office superstores, the other being Office Depot, and they wanted to do a merger. So in the old days, what you did is you argued over what's the right definition of the market. Is it superstores? Does it include all stationary stores? What is it? Is it cities? Is it counties? Is it states? What is it? So you can imagine how that argument went. FTC actually availed itself of some volunteer labor to do the following. They went out and they checked prices in Staples and in OfficeMax in a number of markets throughout the U.S. And they looked at prices for Staples where they competed with OfficeMax and where they didn't compete with OfficeMax. Then they looked at OfficeMax prices where they competed with Staples and they didn't compete with Staples. And they came up very simply with the fact that prices were about double where they didn't compete. That was the end of the story. We don't need to worry about market definitions. We don't need to worry about HHIs. We now know what would happen in the event of a merger. End of story. Direct evidence. And this has colored the thinking in very important ways of antitrust authorities since then. The very compelling merger, the very compelling argument. Okay? And it really ushered in a new way of thinking about this. Now, how does that apply here? How does the FCC assess competition? Well, I said the last 2 reports really expanded the scope. They looked not only at carriers, but they looked at handsets, apps, operating systems, and what have you. Okay, this is really looked at the market very broadly, and this is a good thing to do. Okay. For carriers, HHI includes, FCC includes HHI. It included profitability, and it had a tremendous amount of very direct evidence. All the direct evidence I'm going to be talking about today has come out of the FCC report. Okay. But it ends up saying, well, we don't know whether there's effective competition or not. It doesn't actually say that. It just doesn't say effective competition or not. Now, HHI, as we'll see in a minute, has been somewhat higher than it has in previous years. But the direct evidence of competition, pricing, competitive entry, innovation, rivalrous behavior, is significantly higher than it has been in previous years. So is that bad or good? Well, it tends to highlight the HHI evidence and also profitability evidence. It doesn't, incidentally, directly say high profitability equals market power, thank God, okay? However, there's an audience for this, besides us, such as the commissioners. And Commissioner Copps, in his comments on this report, basically says, immediately points to HHI, saying we got a lack of competition here, and there's no rebuttal from the report. In other words, the report basically invited cherry picking of the results, which is what happened, and to an important part of the audience. Okay? Seems to come to no judgment about effective competition. Hard to supply because what I'd like to do is this appears to presage unnecessary FCC regulation in this market. Okay. Now, what's the indirect evidence? Here I'm going to show you both. The HHI has been increasing up until about 2005, fairly rapidly, hasn't been flat, but it's been increasing, if at all, fairly slowly. It's not new. Okay. Interestingly enough, the cellular consumer price index has been dropping like a stone. Okay, now, you might, that's just interesting, How come these things go in opposite directions, one might ask, okay? Good point. But this is important. Prices are, in fact, dropping, and they're dropping significantly. More direct evidence, whoops. There we go. These are all examples of price rivalry that come out of the FCC report. AT&T, this is all in the last couple of years, introduces its A-list calling features, which enable unlimited mobile calling amongst parties. Sprint introduces unlimited mobile calling, again at no additional charge. T-Mobile introduces a lower price version of its unlimited national voice calling prices. Okay. Verizon Wireless, market leader here, reducing prices for its unlimited calling. Okay, there's a lot of action going on. Okay, AT&T has to respond. Sprint Nextel reduces its monthly charges. These are all in succession. Okay, Metro PCS. I don't know if you have Metro PCS in your city. It's one of the fastest growing carriers right now. New entrant. Increases their respective unlimited calling plans. Leap, which sells under the name of Cricket. You might have it in your town. And finally, Sprint Nextel says, okay, you get unlimited calling to any number, not just mobile to mobile. Okay, so what we see, which corresponds to the decline in the CPI, what you see here is successive competitive responses. Okay. Now, what we're looking at here is what we call in this business ARPU, or average revenue per user. And this is kind of interesting. This is price declines across the board. Okay. Now, I want to make it clear that in economic theory, price declines do not necessarily say you don't have market power. Even in a monopoly case, if we find that costs are declining rapidly, or at all, that prices will decline, not as rapidly, but they will decline. So you can, in fact, have declining prices even with market power. These are rather steep declines, and what's interesting is they come at a time when the opportunity cost of what they're offering, which is spectrum, is actually rising because of spectrum shortages. So we're in a period where they have a limited amount of spectrum, data is increasing, everybody's feeling the spectrum pinch, and yet prices are declining. Okay, It's not exactly proof positive, but it does very suggestive of lack of market power. You may be surprised at this. I don't know if, for those of you who are around at 2000 when everybody was saying the Europeans are beating us. Remember that? We should have chosen we should have chosen, what was it? GSM, yeah. Whatever that is. So, well, guess what? We do quite well on average revenue per voice minute. And incidentally, we also have, no big surprise, demand curve sloped downward. We also have the highest minutes of use of customers. Okay? So, kind of interesting. Data prices falling like a stone, okay? So, in steep decline. Now, here's the interesting thing, because this is what a real industrial organization economist worries about is, do we see entry? Okay. Well, yeah, we do, actually. Bob is going to speak a little more on this, but basically what we see, these are all fairly new, okay? Clearwire now has 4.4 million subscribers. It has 4G in the form of WiMAX in 71 cities. Leap Wireless, which is Cricket, a little bit more. It's in territory which covers 100 million Americans. It is actually the fastest growing carrier. Okay. Metro PCS, somewhat larger. It's a low-cost carrier, but interesting enough, this gets to competitive innovation. It has been the first carrier to produce, to offer 4G LTE, which is the gold standard of 4G. Light Squared, we all know where that is. They're in this big fight with the FCC and with the GPS community about whether they can offer, but these guys want to become a wholesaler of LTE 4G services. They promise to cover 260 million people. Okay. We have super regionals as well. They offer service. These also offer national plans. You can call any place in the country. Okay, so although they're super regional, you don't have to call within the region. You can do it. Now, from all this, direct evidence of innovation, of entry, of falling prices, of international comparisons, what have you. What lessons does the FCC draw? Well, it could not bring itself to conclude that there was effective competition, okay, despite that evidence. Let me sort of say what's in the law. It says the FCC shall include in its annual report an analysis of whether or not there is an effective competition. Well, the fact that they haven't done it for 2 years strikes me as a little bit of an in-your-face, and if I were the relevant chairman of the committee in Congress to do this, I would yank one of these guys in and whomp them upside the head. But it also suggests that they'll be willing to run the risk of this for some reason. Okay, and again, it gets back, what's the plan here? Are we setting ourselves up possibly for further regulation? And again, this invited a significant player, that is an FCC commissioner, to say one number sticks out like a sore thumb, the HHI. Shows that, get this, concentration in mobile wireless service providers has skyrocketed. Not exactly a value-free term, is it? The facts tell us that some things are not right. Well, I don't know. If you ignore these facts and you look at those facts, maybe that's what you get. A concern. Is more regulation on the way? It kind of looked like it. I will now turn this over. It's okay to cheer now, honey. Okay. I'll turn it over to Bob.
When Jerry brought up Jumping Jack Flash, I was worried he was going to say I had to play the role of Mick Jagger, which I decidedly will not. I want to thank Harold for putting together this conference and for doing some really fine work after he left the FCC on how the FCC actually works. And Jerry is one of the gurus in that area, as well as someone who has done some spectacular work on spectrum. And I hope that the FCC and other regulatory institutions around the world take some of his policy recommendations a little bit more seriously. I just want to build on a couple of the themes that Jerry mentioned in his introductory remarks, if I can figure out how to work this thing. First, he mentioned entry, and I'm going to present a little bit more evidence on that. Secondly, I'm going to describe a regression that he, Hal, and I did, which looks at this issue of the relationship between pricing and concentration at a little deeper level. And finally, I'm just going to offer a few conclusions. So I'll try to make it my remarks brief and pointed, and then you can give us some pointed questions if you're so inclined. The key, economists look at several things to evaluate the competitiveness of a market, as Jerry said, but one really important point is, to use a Baumol-like term, is the market contestable? Can folks get in there, enter, and actually do business and try to take away business from incumbents, or build on that by innovating in some way? And what we observe in this market is that there is a fair amount of entry and different kinds of entry. I think, and I think Jerry would agree with me, that the FCC did a good job of describing entry in this market, though they didn't necessarily reach the conclusion that we reach in our paper. It talks about Clearwire, Leap, and others that he mentioned, and mentions that some of these are economically significant, and we agree. In addition, the business community talks about, in particular JP Morgan Equity, just to pick an anecdote, talks about a wireless industry that's characterized by aggressive competition. In a separate research effort that Hal and I did, I guess a couple of years ago, there was some concern in Washington, D.C., and I feel a little bit removed from Washington, D.C., now living in Oxford, and sometimes distance is good, where folks were worried about the iPhone taking over the world, and we had to do something about that. So I actually do have an iPhone now, but it's on the Vodafone network, so I can't pick up my email here. But they were concerned that that the iPhone was going to take over 100% of the market. Well, if you actually look at market statistics more recently, you see that the iPhone isn't doing nearly as well as the platform that was developed by Google. So I think there is a natural tendency in looking at some of these telecom markets to focus on certain statistics, like Jerry raised the statistic pointed to by the commissioner, the concentration issue, without looking at the broader characteristics of these markets to see whether they're dynamically competitive and whether innovation is taking place, and we believe it clearly is. Our bottom line is that the entry that we observe in the market does not suggest, at least to us, that there's a high degree of market power. He talked about the Bain paradigm, the structure, conduct, performance, so I'm not going to dwell on that, except to make one point. I was unable to find any evidence that the FCC offered in its report that there was a clear relationship here. And that led us to ask the question of whether we could look and explore whether there might be a relationship between what people pay in their bills, much like the Staples Office Depot example that Jerry gave, but look and explore whether there's a relationship between what you pay monthly in your cell phone bill and how concentrated the market is, or whether there are entrants like Metro PCS in that market. You saw the earlier figure, which I think is telling in some ways, but doesn't control for certain variables that suggests when a HHI is going up, for whatever reason, prices are going down. We wanted to explore this in more detail if we could actually get our hands on what are called microdata, what you actually pay monthly, what individuals pay monthly, and we were for a certain period of time. The test we used was to look at actual wireless bills provided by the TNS data set for the year 2008, and our dependent variable, or sorry, our variable on the left-hand side was what people actually pay in terms of their monthly bill, and on the right-hand side we had a measure of concentration, the HHI, and some other variables that I'll talk about shortly. And the question we wanted to ask was, did we see a positive or a negative coefficient associated with the HHI after we controlled for demographic variables and income variables? So in particular, we wanted to know whether, along the lines of structure, conduct, performance, if concentration is associated with higher bills, and that would be consistent with a positive coefficient on HHI. So the variables that we looked at, and this is one example of a regression we ran in 2008 where we had about 8,000 observations, were things like the age of the respondent, the income range, whether the wireless phone was used to surf the wireless web, and so forth. And the next slide sort of summarizes what we found. Well, first of all, let me go back a minute. So you look at the HHI coefficient, it's not significant, and it's negative. So that's what we found in this regression, and we ran a few other regressions, time permitting. I'll talk about that. So the big result here is that HHI is not significant in this particular case. The other variables, most of them had the key, most of the key variables had the expected sign. As the age of the household increased, there was a lower bill. Kids may talk more, I don't know, or young people may talk more. Text messaging was associated with higher bills, and so forth. One result that we found a little puzzling, and we're still puzzling over a bit, is that household income is actually associated with lower bills. That's to say, the sign is negative and statistically significant. However, it's not economically significant. It affects the bills on the order of pennies per month, and that. So we're exploring that further. And as I mentioned, we did a number of sensitivity analyses, which you can see in the paper. We also ran a regression without HHI, but introducing dummy variables for the presence of firms like LEAP and Metro PCS, which is much along the methodologically is very similar to the idea that was done in Staples and Office Depot, where you had an Office Depot in the same area where prices lower or higher. And in fact, we found that the presence of these companies, if anything, tended to raise prices, but I don't think those results are robust. And our view is that there are lots of carriers to choose from. When you look at the top 25 markets, there's an average of about 5 unique carriers. The FCC mentions that about 90% of the population lives in census areas with 4 or more carriers. And in the 15th report, things looked about the same. You could choose from 5 or more providers of mobile voice services for all but 10% of the population. Here's an abbreviated table. A little bit more detail is in the paper that basically confirms that point about carriers for the top 25 urban areas in the United States. You have a choice of about 5 carriers. So our conclusion, first of all, just from a normative point of view, is that we think that the FCC erred in not putting more weight on direct evidence as opposed to the structure, conduct, performance paradigm. introduced more than a half century ago. We also, at least for the regressions that we ran, do not see much support for that story. This is a Washington comment in a way. I wouldn't bother, if I were presenting this at the Oxford Internet Institute, I wouldn't even bother making this point. But I've noticed in the press, there's been a tendency by some to characterize this market as a duopoly. And in my view, nothing could be further from the truth, particularly given the kind of entry that we're observing. We think this market is effectively competitive, and we also believe that the FCC's analysis, its own analysis, supports that finding. So let me stop there and ask Harold how you want to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think we're going to go to Q&A, and I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative of asking the first question. And that has to do with market definition. And we've been speaking as if there is a sort of single wireless market. I just wanted to get your thoughts on how to define it. Is it narrower, or is it perhaps even broader? Is there, for example, on the broadband side, is there a single broadband market that includes both wireline and wireless? Is there a voice market that's both wireline and wireless? Or is there a narrower wireless market that depends on technology? And how would you go about defining a market that either includes wireless services or is narrower than wireless services?
Yeah. Easy question. I'll give it to you.
There you go. Easy question, complicated answer. This is a big old bad market, let me tell you, okay? Let's just take voice for a moment. Now, first of all the firms we've been talking about offer voice. Almost all of them, I think they all offer data. So if we sort of look at what are the services that are offered and, the set of companies that we've talked about, that's kind of, loosely speaking, what we think of markets. Now, let's talk about voice for a moment. It was, wireless, in my view, has always been sort of the poor stepchild, okay? When wireless came along, and most of you remember when it was big bulky things that stockbrokers on their BMWs were calling it. And it was, oh, well, this isn't serious. This isn't like voice. This is like some yuppie thing that's going on. And then as it became farmers in their trucks talking, and it became, well, okay, but this is fine. But this is for mobile. It's not really competitive with wireline. And that has generally been the position of, is this competitive with wireline? And we now know the answer to that. We have something, this is going to be close to right, but I think it's about 25% of people with wireless service do not have wireline. Okay, now, for them, that's direct. This number could be 26, 24, something like that. But that's kind of, and the other thing is it's growing very fast. First paper I wrote on this, it was 20%. Okay, and now it's growing at least 4 to 5% since then. Guess what? Wireline's a dying industry. Okay, that's just it. And of course, there's other substitutes for voice, including VoIP over your broadband. So, voice market has actually got a lot of players in it. Okay, but certainly wireless offers some very unique characteristics that VoIP over broadband or wireline cannot offer. Okay, one of these days I'm going to finally convince my wife that we can cut the cord and do entirely wireless. Okay, not quite there yet, but close. Now let's look on the broadband side. The same characteristic of the poor stepchild. Wireless broadband, never going to happen. Okay? We need to have 100 megabits to every home, and you're only going to do that with fiber, and that's the way we have it. So I said, good. If everybody in the world needed Lamborghinis, this is the right way to go. Most of us don't. Most of us get along with Ford Focuses, and that's why cheap DSL is so popular. And look at what's been happening to the bandwidth on offer and wireless, and look what could happen if the FCC and Congress got off its butt and put a lot more spectrum out there, which I've been arguing about for a long time, okay? What could happen? Well, in fact, we're beginning to see it with LTE, 4G, and people are now beginning to say, well, maybe this could do low-end broadband, which is what most of us use, quite successfully. This could be the Ford Focus. Okay, this could move us. Now, incidentally, let's just put another thing in mind here. You see the number of firms we're talking about. You know, in every area, we're basically talking about 5 firms. It's not rural, but metropolitan areas. We're talking about 5 firms. Okay, and they're all offering some form of data, 3G and pretty much 4G coming up. Now, what would that do to the broadband market? Certainly for the, let's say, under 10 megabit stuff. That would change broadband from really being a duopoly. Am I allowed to say that? Okay, well, anyway. From really being a duopoly to having 5 to 7 firms in it. That drastically changes the economics of broadband. So, yes, there is that market as well. Wired and wireless will always compete, even though people are used to poo-pooing wireless and saying it's not going to be there. But I think it will, okay, and I think it's an important market. Now, does that mean we need to consider Comcast as competing with LTE 4G? Maybe we do. I don't know. Right now, I'm not doing that. I don't consider that as part of the market, but I think in the future I would. And that's how to do it. Now, fortunately, I think when you look at this indirect evidence at the set of firms, or the direct evidence in this set of firms we're talking about, what that market definition is doesn't really make a whole lot of difference. I think, this is like the eyeball evidence we talked in the beginning. Once you begin to look closer, it gets even more competitive as you look at it. So, again, this is one of these. Why are we even asking this question?
I just want to add one or two things. As Jerry implied, this market is evolving very quickly, and one of the things I find very exciting about 4G is it is going to lead to more competition with the Comcast of the world and so forth. And we don't know exactly how it's going to change the landscape, but we know the direction.
Let me add a point to that. Competition in broadband. All us, netheads got kind of excited when Verizon started putting Fios in. Said, okay, this is going to be the broadband competition. This is going to be the 100 meg to the house and so forth and so on. I don't think so. Okay, I think we're going to see broadband be a rather segmented market. Okay, if you are into watching, streaming HD movies or playing, Mortal Kombat or whatever on the web, maybe you're going to want to pay for very high bandwidth, which is available. I mean, you can get, 50 meg from Comcast with DOCSIS 3. But most of us don't do that. Most of us don't need a Lamborghini. We're fine with a Ford Focus. And so I see that market segment as what's addressable by 4G. And I think it's going to be a big deal. And I think it will make that part of the market competitive. But Fios isn't going to do it. I really don't see fiber doing anything except filling a niche market. It's an important market, but it's a niche market.
Why don't we open it up to the floor for questions? Wait for the microphone and identify yourself.
For either of our two speakers, or for Harold if he wants to jump in too, what further signs do you see that the latest report that didn't reach a conclusion on effective competition is going to lead to more regulation by the FCC and perhaps even in the AT&T, T-Mobile proceeding?
You want to go first? I'll go first.
Yeah, why don't you go first on the regulation part?
Okay, all righty. Don't see any yet. I do see the FCC generally moving towards more regulation than I feel comfortable with, as a general rule. I think, frankly, the move into network neutrality was solving a problem that doesn't really exist, which regulators are pretty good at. Would you agree with that? Yeah.
Jerry, if you're uncomfortable, just think how I feel.
Okay. The notion that they make a significant change here is a concern to me, okay? This is a signal. And what concerns me is that the thoroughness, this is the distinctive thing. This is kind of what makes me concerned about this. The guys that put this report together, both in the Wireless Bureau and the economists that were supporting them, they know what's going on. They have good economists at the FCC. They are really smart guys. They know what the answer to this is. They know how to do a competitive analysis. The decision to say there's no effective competition did not come from an economist, I can tell you that. It came from somebody above their pay grade. That's what concerns me. Somebody's got an agenda here, maybe a couple of people have agenda. And it's not the economist. It's eighth floor stuff. So, to me, this is a signal from the eighth floor. And you can see it's right in the report. I mean, the evidence in the report is overwhelming. And yet they refuse to make that. In spite of the fact that they're directed to by Congress. That's a strong signal. Something's going on here. Okay? And it's coming from the eighth floor.
I think the second part of your question was how's this finding going to affect deliberations over the AT&T T-Mobile proposal? I don't know, but I would hope that, I guess the lesson I draw from this and looking at this report is that we need to think a lot about how a merger like this is going to affect innovation and consumer welfare, and in a dynamic sense over time. So the point that Jerry made earlier that, for example, I think AT&T is promising to roll out 4G at a faster rate and so forth, and I think that's a good thing. To the extent that's going to erode market barriers, so for example with broadband, I think that's a really good thing and should enter into their calculations. But I haven't worked at the FCC, so I can't read the tea leaves as well as you do to know how a particular finding in a report would affect something.
Jerry, I would say it's not an accident that the commission, after reaching a certain conclusion for 13 years in a row, suddenly decided not to reach that conclusion. I share Jerry's concerns that it could be a pretext to future regulation. It is certainly something that if the commission wanted to point to the wireless competition reports, it could point to them and say, because we failed to find effective competition in the wireless industry, therefore we're going to do the following. Now, what the following is, that's up to a lot of people's imaginations. But what would fall in the range of that imagination is probably not good. Let me just make an observation that that sort of builds on what Jerry and Bob have been talking about. If you look at businesses around the United States and the depth of what some people would call a recession or the slowness of our economy over the past many years, there are few industries, if any, that have had the following characteristic: substantial expansion of consumption, substantial lowering of price, substantial innovation, substantial diffusion of new and related businesses, whether it's in the application world on the software side, whether it's in the device world on the manufacturing side. It is one of the very, very few bright spots in the American economy over the past several years. And yet there are what I would characterize as signals that maybe this area should be subject to more regulation. And I think that the 14th and 15th reports are a foundation for future regulation.
Can I just raise a broader point that I think builds on that, and is relevant today? We're in these or someone's in this town is in these budget negotiations, and my conjecture is there's going to be significant cutbacks in expenditures, whether it happens next week or 6 months or 2 years down the line. I do think that's going to lead to more pressure for using regulation as a tool to redistribute income at regulatory agencies, including the FCC. So that's a broader view of how regulation and taxation play off each other.
I do see one possible good side effect coming out of the budget negotiations, and that is the one thing the FCC can do to raise money is to hold spectrum auctions.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And they have been reluctant to do so. It never happens quickly. I mean, it's always like 4 years planning to do a spectrum auction. But they can raise billions, which of course is almost nothing compared to the budget. But it's money out there, and they could get it. And there seems to be some bills working their way through Congress to say, let's get some of this stuff into the market and let's raise some money doing this. And now this is all for the wrong reasons, but what a grand idea. What a grand idea to get more spectrum out there. So that's a good fallout from this debt reduction nonsense.
Yeah, this is to Professor Faulhaber. When I listened to your presentation, I thought you were lamenting that we don't have a finding the last 2 years of whether or not there is effective competition. But as I hear the rest of what's coming afterwards, it sounds like you're rather happy there isn't, because if they were pushed to such a finding, it sounds like they would find there isn't, and therefore the forces that believe there's effective competition are doing their best to avoid that by making no finding. If you really wanted a finding, it seems to me you could certainly find a friendly congressman to ask the GAO to investigate and make them do their job, or you could go to any one of a number of the companies in this area who don't like regulation, and they could be a plaintiff to mandamus the committee to do what the law requires, which is make a finding. But that finding, which they make, of course, the substance of it is beyond what a judge can determine, so that therefore they would come out against you. So I guess that being the case, you should be happy, I guess, that the other shoe hasn't fallen, and you're waiting for that notice of proposed rulemaking to attack it at that time. Am I sensing where you are?
Actually, it's good. I hadn't really thought about that. This is sort of be careful what you ask for, okay, which is always a good point. I mean, I was sort of assuming there'd be people like Harold on the commission who would be economists who would say, what's the matter with you guys? Of course there's effective competition. But that's not the way things seem to be going. And it could be that we would say, okay, you have to come out with a ruling and say, okay, right, no effective competition. That, in fact, could happen. Despite the evidence, okay, despite the overwhelming evidence. I was sort of assuming they'd have some shame, okay, but that's probably wrong. So my apologies. You may, in fact, be right.
Question here.
John Weicker, Hudson Institute. Professor Faulhaber mentioned a couple of times that the last two reports have ignored a congressional requirement. Has anyone in Congress responded? My sense from what you said is that no one has responded to that. But
none that I've heard of, but, I live in Delaware. I don't live here. Okay, so somebody else might know the answer to that.
I wish I could tell you that every time the commission or some other agency of government didn't do what the law said, that someone in Congress would come down hard on them. I've yet to see that. It happens all the time.
I'd like to try that argument next time I get picked up for speeding. see how that works. I don't think it'll work so well.
Philip Weber, Congressional Budget Office. What's happening to the assets? The HHI is going up, but what's happening what's happening to the assets? And I only ask that because I'm kind of curious as to see if they did hold an auction, who would end up with the goodies.
I'm not going to be able to answer that, Bob.
Bill, if you could maybe refine the question a bit, which specific assets are you talking about?
Well, I was just thinking in terms of, Jerry was saying, let's have an auction, and there are, among the pro-regulatory forces, there are people who ask, who think that certain companies should be excluded from those auctions because the effect of competition, they will be able to essentially buy bid the competitive price plus $1 and get all the goodies. And so I was wondering, in your, since you had been talking about how, in fact, wireless can become a competition against broadband, well, there are people who would put forth the scenario that if they auction it now, it will be bought by the same people who are, in fact, the duopoly in broadband, and then there would be no competition.
I think you need to look carefully about the duopoly. I think Verizon's probably doing okay on spectrum. AT&T is up against the wall. Okay, so of course they want to buy more. If you look at Clear and Light Square, they got plenty of spectrum. So, that story kind of, not sure that accords with the facts. But let me talk about other stuff too. I mean, we sort of forget that the cable companies have a ton of spectrum. And I think they're kind of waiting to get into this business. We'll see. It would come as no surprise to you to find out that Google is actually larger than the entire cable industry by about a factor of 2 in terms of market capitalization. I mean, they could go into this business with 1.5 hands tied behind their back. Okay? And in a sense, they already are with Android. Okay? Which plays to their strength. A lot of people talk about all you need to get in this business is money, and Google has plenty of money. Why aren't they in it? They are not a network company. They aren't. So they could do it. Okay? They probably wouldn't be good at it early. It'd be like AT&T in the cable business. You remember how well that worked out. They could, but they would certainly have the wherewithal to do it. So the fact that we have Verizon and AT&T as big players, in the grand scheme of things, they're not all that big. Okay, so there's a lot of other players to play in this market. And, you have companies like Leap and Metro PCS who say, yeah, we're going to get in this game, and we're the fastest growing around. Why do we think they're not going to buy anything? Now, the other thing is, we're talking about 5 or 6 players in each market. I'm not sure it's going to get much bigger than that. Okay? So 2 things you have to think about. One is, you can have more players in a game where you're distributing, where your network is essentially wireless, than you can if it's a wired network. Okay? Well, we only see 1 telephone company. Okay? But we see 5 wireless companies. This is even more stark if you look at the third of the emerging market, rural India, Africa, and what have you. These guys are having wireless phones with it. They don't even know what a wireline phone looks like, for God's sake, and yet they're getting wireless. So the costs of distribution in this business are reasonably low compared to wireline. But it's not like building supermarkets. They're not going to be all over the place. So will we see 5 or 6 in every market? I think, yeah. Will we see 20? No. But it's not going to be 1 or 2. It's going to be 5 or 6. And I think the markets will support that. And And if somehow I think there's enough money sloshing around in this business. Remember, this is a highly attractive business, right? Data is growing like topsy, very innovative. I mean, this is a market that people would want to get in if it looks like the market's getting cornered, okay? So there's plenty of opportunity for entry. And this notion that somehow the big two are going to buy it all up and that's going to be the end of it is, I think, it's a story.
I think building on what Jerry was just saying, if you look at the top, say, top 5 wireless carriers in 5 years ago and 10 years ago and 15 years ago and 20 years ago, the identity of those companies changes every 5 years. There's a lot of both competition and rivalry, entry and exit, some of it through mergers and acquisitions, some of it through just companies completely entering the business. And if you look at the businesses that have participated in spectrum auctions at the commission over the past 20 years, it's a wide variety of companies, some of which frankly don't exist today. I think if you're trying to figure out what would happen in a commission auction, a lot of it will depend on the rules that the commission sets, and the rules the commission set are not always the same rules that, frankly, a rational economist would set. So, and that's kind of hard to tell in advance what rules the commission is going to set in advance.
Let me mention one other thing along that line. It seems to be a favorite activity of both Congress and the Commission to try to tweak auctions for various reasons. Okay, well, we're going to favor designated entities. If it's Native American companies, we're going to favor them. Or we're going to favor companies that don't have a lot of money, like Next Wave. Okay? There are two possible outcomes. Either it's silly and nothing actually really happens except some names change, okay? Or it's a disaster, like Next Wave. I mean, Next Wave was a real disaster, okay? It never works. It just doesn't. Now, we were talking last night at dinner to say, well, if you hired some really smart economist to say, okay, we want to favor some kinds of companies over others. Can you figure out how to do it without screwing it up? Yeah, maybe they could. I don't know, David Solan or somebody like that who knows this stuff. But they never do. They just put in stupid regulations, and it ends up being a disaster. So anytime you hear people like, we're going to tweak the auctions, I mean, even in the C-Block auction, they walked away from, I don't know, billions of dollars, and Verizon got cheap spectrum. I'm not sure who was helped by all that, but maybe they thought they were. It just never worked. Okay, and it's just, all you can do is hope it isn't a disaster as it's been in the past. Here's the young. Yeah.
Oh, well.
Oh, there's another guy. Yeah. Okay. Ladies first.
Hi, is this working? I'm wondering what role, if any, Skype plays in any of this. Have you seen it make any, have any influence on anything throughout your research, market share or anything like that?
Well, I think that Skype is, first of all, I've got Skype on my phone now, I have to confess, on my mobile phone. But, I mean, it's a it's not in the wireless space in the sense that we were talking about, but it's an app that works on your phone or on your computer. So, I mean, I think it's important for driving traffic.
Yeah, I think it along with countless other applications, substantially drive broadband demand. Two-way video
Yeah, I think
eats
Netflix
up a lot
or
of.
something like that.
Well, Netflix obviously does too, but if you want to do a two-way video
Oh, yeah.
conference on your handset, yeah. Drives a lot of video demand.
I'm not sure Skype drives enough bandwidth to have a big effect on these things. Two-way video. I mean, this is like pretty cheap two-way video on Skype. But it's okay, and I see it primarily, all the VoIP stuff, as just another way to chisel away at wireline mainly. Now, Skype on wireless is a little bit like Wi-Fi over wireless. It's kind of a way to basically go over broadband without actually incurring carrier charges, radio charges, or using up your minutes, I guess. So that's a way to go, and that's a concern that the carriers are going to have to deal with, and they're generally doing it pretty well because there's a pretty strong demand for it out there. I don't see it so far as really affecting their revenue model too much, but it's there. I mean, it's like everything in this space. There's all like little interactions going on all over the place. Some of them are becoming big interactions, like between wireless and wireline voice, and eventually between 4G and cable broadband. So these are becoming bigger. But this is a very interconnected space, and I think that's really what your question is.
Hi, Hans Kuttner from Hudson. I enjoy the opportunity to ask a dumb question of a smart panel. I'm old enough that when I took introductory micro, one of the motivating examples for understanding second-degree price discrimination was, see, the phone company, they offer you cheaper service on Sunday than they do the other days of the week. Why is it that this market continues to be characterized by unlimited pricing or prices that don't seem to have time of day or congestion pricing to them at the consumer level?
Well, AT&T and Verizon haven't asked me yet to help them with their pricing. Part of this has to do with we consumers have not been suitably trained by economists to understand that we need not just peak load pricing, but actually congestion pricing. So that when you pick up your phone, it should say, the price is now 4 cents a minute because everybody else is using their phone, okay? The name for this is Vickrey pricing, after William Vickrey, who was a Nobel Prize winner from Columbia. And every economist knows this is the right way to do it, okay? Problem is people don't accept that. We see this, people seem to like some form of block pricing or unlimited pricing. That's what they accept. They're not too happy with even time of day, which is not strictly speaking congestion pricing. We economists would like to see congestion pricing, but this is like we economists would like to see free trade, but we haven't won that battle yet, okay? This is kind of the same thing. This is what people seem to like, okay? We will, I'm sure, see this, although we're beginning to see the edges of it, in broadband as well, which is to say, once you have all you can eat, which is what broadband largely is today, well, it's going to be a lot of people that are very hungry that come to your buffet. And eventually we're going to have, I think, some form of bandit pricing. That's not nearly as specific as congestion pricing, which all economists would like to see. But we haven't come close to educating customers that this is a good thing for them. Okay, and I don't think we will, to tell you the truth.
But we are moving. Oh, go ahead, Bob.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say many of the carriers are moving to banded pricing and getting away from the unlimited side on broadband. It's a trade-off between the marketers of services who want simplicity. Consumers love simplicity, and they also like to know in advance what they're going to be paying and not subject to surprises. Versus the efficiency of the pricing structure that economists would like to see. But scarcity will always drive companies to efficient pricing. And so when you have unlimited plans and there actually is a scarcity and congestion and scarcity of spectrum, it isn't going to work. And so that's why you see the carriers moving away from unlimited plans on mobile broadband.
I guess I come at this a little differently. I mean, you could make the same argument for going out to Starbucks in the morning or McDonald's at lunch. Why don't we have real-time pricing? And I don't view it as a bad thing. I like to know what my hamburger's going to cost then. Maybe I'm not wearing my economist hat then. Maybe if we did a little bit more proselytizing, they'd move around towards the victory answer, but I'm not necessarily sure that's more efficient or better. I guess where I come out is I want businesses to be allowed to explore, whether it's restaurants or the businesses we're talking about here, what kind of pricing works in the marketplace. And if we want to proselytize and convince a generation of people that they should enjoy real-time pricing, that's fine. But I don't really see that as a big issue. I think our job is to sort of set the rules of the game so resources are allocated reasonably efficiently given what consumers want. So I'm not in the nudge camp on that one.
I just wanted to ask, what is your view of the AT&T T-Mobile merger and its effect on competition if it goes through?
I've been waiting for that one. I may have different positions on this than my co-authors. In fact, I know I do. I think the jury's still out on this, okay? I think this work in the state of competition is relevant but not dispositive, okay? Now, let me say what I mean by the jury's still out on this. What happens is those that are seeking the merger have a story, okay? Good story, okay? This is what we can do with it, this is fine. Others who oppose it have a story, okay? And I guess it's a good story, okay? Now, I have some reasonable confidence that when this gets to the Justice Department, this kind of ties back into our paper here, that the Justice Department is going to take the stories, break it down, and look at the evidence. That it will now no longer be stories, it will be evidence. Now, I'm not privy to what's going on here, so I don't know what the evidence is. I do know there's stories, and I have told some of my friends at places, look, you need to do more than tell stories. You got to get some evidence, and you got to get commitments, right? And then maybe you're talking credible stories, okay? But at least I'm not there yet. Now, maybe the Justice Department is. I know they will have to be, okay? And I have confidence that, A, they will do something that's evidence-based, and they will do something that follows the two questions that we had up there about substantially lessen competition and do the presumed deficiencies, are the benefits to that greater than the cost of any loss of competition. I'm confident they're going to follow that, okay? That's what they do. They're good at that, okay? My concern after the FCC's two reports is that they may not do that. They may be driven by something else that's not as disciplined as what would go here. Okay, so to the extent that what we do relates to the merger, that's it. It has to do with the approach that the Justice Department will take, which I have some confidence in, versus the report that the FCC, the course that the FCC will take, where I have somewhat less confidence in as a result of these two reports. Okay, I make no judgment about the merger at this stage.
Do you want to say? I have a little different take on that. I'm living in Oxford and not in Washington, D.C., and I blogged about the merger and some other things related to Google. But my take, based on what I've read, so I don't have the Justice Department documents or whatever, but based on what I've read, is that there's a fairly strong case that this merger, proposed merger, is going to promote innovation, which I think economists are beginning to care about more and more in the form of rolling out 4G faster, and therefore be good for consumers and businesses, which is kind of what economists care about. If you ask me, in a first best world, what would I want? I'd probably want what I call the Faulhaber solution. Get enough spectrum out there so that we don't have to deal with these complex merger issues, but we're not doing that. So we're in a second best world, and I think that on balance, this is going to promote innovation and be good for consumers. But I say that with the caveat that I don't have access to the information that the Justice Department has on this.
Why don't we take one more question? Well, not seeing any. I think, why don't we give another round of applause to our speakers, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Very good.
Thank you. We will meet again on September 16th. Judge Williams and other events will be announced before then. Thank you.